My name is Joan. I'm a mother, a widow, and, until that night, someone who'd mastered the art of keeping quiet. But when the invitation came, I realized, some dinners aren't about food. They're about what gets served between the lines. Alright, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. Joan Montgomery stood at the far end of her narrow kitchen, watching butter soften in a chipped ceramic bowl. The walls were painted a muted shade of pine, faded where sunlight had pressed too long against them. A ticking wall clock, shaped like an owl with fading brass eyes, was the only sound besides the quiet hum of the oven. She hadn't made this recipe in 12 years. It was Harold's favorite. And Daniel's, too, back when he was small enough to sit on the counter with his legs swinging, helping by eating shredded cheese by the fistful. She stirred without thinking, her body moving in a choreography burned deep into her muscle memory: salt, flour, sharp cheddar, creamed onions, milk boiled and whisked with a precision that could pass for grief. The invitation had arrived 3 days earlier, no phone call, no text. Just a thick white envelope slipped under her front door like a dare. Daniel and Vanessa Cordell request the pleasure of your company. Saturday, 7 p.m. Dinner. Just us. It's been too long. Vanessa's name was written in smaller font, but the sharp edge of her cursive sliced more than ink. Joan had stared at it for hours, setting it on the windowsill, then picking it up again. She didn't RSVP. Didn't need to. Vanessa would know she'd come. She always did. Vanessa was the kind of woman who engineered certainty, down to the shade of her lipstick, the curvature of her wine glasses, the pacing of her social media captions. But this dinner was different. Just us. That phrase crawled under Joan's skin. It hadn't been just us in over a decade. Not since Harold's funeral, when Daniel stood beside Vanessa and said nothing as his mother packed the last of her husband's belongings into a battered suitcase. Joan's house was quiet. No television. No music. Just the occasional creak of old floorboards that knew her better than any living soul. She didn't need noise to fill her space. She had history instead, thick as fog, thin as dust. She pulled the casserole from the oven and let it settle, the scent of cheddar and baked onions rising in warm waves. It wasn't a gesture of peace. It was a statement. A reminder of where Daniel had come from, of who had raised him, fed him, patched his knees and bought him his first book on architecture. Long before Vanessa and her curated home and her bulletproof brunches. Joan dressed with precision. Nothing dramatic. Just navy slacks and a cardigan Harold once said brought out her backbone. She pinned on a simple gold brooch, her mother's, and checked her reflection one final time. The face looking back was softer than she remembered, but not fragile. She placed the covered dish into a travel tote, double-wrapped in an old quilted cloth, and drove across town just as the sun fell into a molten blur behind the trees. Daniel and Vanessa's house sat like a showroom at the end of a cul-de-sac, 3 stories of sleek gray stone and immaculate landscaping. The lawn was too perfect. Not a single weed, not a single wildness. Joan stepped out of the car slowly, casserole in hand. She hadn't been inside the house in over a year. There had been an argument then. Something about the holidays. Vanessa had said Joan's presence felt dense. Daniel hadn't corrected her. Now, Joan climbed the stone steps, heart ticking against her ribs, and rang the bell. The door opened almost immediately. Vanessa. Her dress was cream silk, effortless. Her lipstick, something between crimson and calculation, was untouched. She smiled like a hostess, not a daughter-in-law. "Joan," she said brightly. "You're early. Come in." Her voice carried the subtle weight of a compliment that was also a correction. Joan nodded, stepped inside. The air smelled of basil and bergamot candles. Daniel's just finishing up in the kitchen, Vanessa said, taking the casserole. You brought your famous dish. That's adorable. It's not adorable, Joan said mildly. It's food. Vanessa smiled wider, holding the dish like a gift she hadn't asked for. The dining room was already set. Joan's eyes moved over the table. Polished wood. Linen napkins folded into rosebuds. Stemmed glasses. Candles flickering. 8 chairs. 8. Joan frowned. You said it would just be the 3 of us. Vanessa blinked innocently. Oh, did I? I must have mentioned a few other guests were coming. Just friends. Daniel's colleagues. You'll love them. Very modern thinkers. Joan stepped closer. Her eyes scanned the name cards. Daniel. Vanessa. Tyler. Sasha. And then she stopped. A 5th card. Neatly placed. Grace. Joan's breath faltered. Her daughter's name. Gone 10 years. Joan looked at Vanessa. Vanessa didn't blink. Just smiled, polished, perfect, and terrifying. Hay smiled like I was the help. Maybe I was. The card said Grace. The name hung in Joan's mind like a dropped plate, quiet, but echoing. She didn't speak it aloud. Didn't ask. Just noted it, folded the question into the same pocket she'd folded her RSVP into. Vanessa had already swept past her, calling out cheerfully, they should be here any minute, as if the moment hadn't cracked something deep. The strangers arrived promptly at 7:10, trailing cologne and curated laughter. One in a camel blazer and turtleneck, the other in sleek black with pointed heels that clicked too loudly against the hardwood. Vanessa greeted them like royalty, air kisses and exaggerated compliments flying like cocktail shrapnel. Joan stood near the mantel, clutching a sweating glass of water. These are Daniel's colleagues, Vanessa announced, guiding them toward the dining table. Well, more than that, partners in vision, right darling? Daniel chuckled, stiff. Yeah, they're good people. He still hadn't made eye contact with Joan. The woman, Sasha, apparently, gave Joan a once-over that felt surgical. And who's this? Daniel's mother, Vanessa replied with a smile too tight to be sincere. Joan. She made the casserole. Oh, said the man, Tyler, turtleneck and teeth, peering at the dish. That's old school. Comfort food, right? Very. Dense, Sasha added, not unkindly, but not kindly either. But hey, that's the Midwest, right? I'm from Oregon, Joan said quietly. Oh. Sasha blinked. My bad. Vanessa laughed too hard. No worries, Joan's recipes are from another era. It's tradition. I think it's cute. Joan smiled thinly. She'd heard the same tone in church bazaars, from women younger and louder who thought age meant irrelevance. They moved to the table. 8 seats, but only 6 bodies. The card marked Grace had disappeared. Joan didn't mention it. She took her place at the far end, opposite Daniel. A positioning she recognized from strategy meetings, not family dinners. Conversation flowed, loud, shallow, decorative. Sasha talked about her emotional alignment coach. Tyler quoted productivity stats like gospel. Vanessa laughed at all the right cues. Daniel nodded along, sipping wine like it was medicine. Joan cut her food in small pieces. No one touched the casserole. So, Joan, Tyler asked during a lull, what do you do? Or did, I guess? I was a librarian, she said. Ah, Sasha cooed. That's sweet. Hard to imagine life without Google now, Tyler added. Joan nodded. We used to have to think before we spoke. It was quieter then. Silence thinned the air for a moment. Vanessa smoothed it over. Joan is full of those classic singers. Daniel's fork clinked against his plate. Joan studied him. The boy she raised used to get nervous before saying grace. Used to ask her how to pronounce difficult words. Used to cry when his goldfish died. Now he was a man with a jaw like his father's and a silence that screamed. She tried again. I passed by the lake today. The weeping willows have grown over that old dock. Remember how you used to? Daniel stood abruptly. More wine. Everyone murmured yes. Joan lowered her eyes. She hadn't been invited to reminisce. She had been summoned, like an artifact, to decorate the illusion of togetherness. When Daniel returned, Vanessa took the floor. She raised her glass, eyes gleaming. To the future, she said brightly. To partnerships and expansion. To growth. And, most importantly, to shedding the past. Every time I opened my mouth, Vanessa had a better anecdote. Joan counted her breaths between bites. 3 in, 3 out. Just enough to pace herself, just enough to keep from blurting something she couldn't take back. Vanessa had mastered the rhythm of the room, and everyone else moved to her tempo. Like a conductor with a silent baton, she directed the flow of conversation with curated ease. Her voice was velvet, her humor always one step ahead of anyone else's. Even Joan. Especially Joan. Oh, Daniel used to get so nervous around confrontation, Vanessa said, touching his arm lightly. I had to train it out of him. Now he's the one leading conflict resolution meetings at the firm. Tyler laughed. You trained him? Sasha smirked. You should teach a masterclass. Vanessa smiled modestly. Oh, he's a fast learner. And worth the effort. Joan kept her face composed, eyes on her plate. The Daniel she knew hadn't needed training, he'd needed space, books, quiet afternoons at the piano, long walks to calm his mind. But those details were not welcome here. When she finally found an opening, a lull between toasts and laughter, she leaned forward gently. Daniel used to play Chopin on our old upright, she began. He learned before he could properly read. His fingers were too small to reach the octaves, but he... Oh. Vanessa interrupted, laughing lightly. You mean when he'd bang on that thing for hours? I told him he had to stop, our neighbors thought we had a haunted house. A round of chuckles followed. Daniel gave a sheepish smile and reached for his water. Yeah, it was a phase. Joan's words folded inward, left unfinished in the space between them. She offered a small, measured smile. Vanessa continued, seamlessly. He's got much better taste now. You should have seen him when we first met, still thought frozen waffles were a food group. She laughed again. I introduced him to texture. Truffle. Heat. Now he's even a wine snob. Daniel nodded politely. She's not wrong. Joan's throat felt dry. The boy who once asked her to pack the same turkey sandwich every day for a year now sat sipping Pinot Noir and nodding at jokes made at his past self's expense. She reached for her water again, but her hand hovered above the glass. Was this how erasure happened? One corrected story at a time. By the time the plates were cleared, her casserole remained mostly untouched. Vanessa had gently pushed it to the side when the conversation shifted. No one commented. It sat there cooling, like a relic. Then, dessert. Vanessa disappeared into the kitchen with an exaggerated wish me luck, and returned minutes later with 4 shallow plates. This, she announced proudly, is my take on something traditional, Joan's famous casserole, reimagined. The table turned to look. It wasn't a casserole. It was a plating, 3 stacked components, a crisp cheese wafer, a small quenelle of whipped potato mousse, and what looked like a caramelized onion reduction drizzled in a perfect swirl. Tyler leaned in. Gorgeous. Sasha clapped once. It smells insane. Daniel offered a proud grin. She's been working on this for weeks. Vanessa set one down in front of Joan last. A little nod to you, of course. Joan looked at the plate. Familiar but foreign. Something pulled apart and reassembled to impress. Her mouth curled, just slightly. Not a smile. Something older than that. It took me 3 seconds to notice. 3 seconds too long. After dessert, Vanessa suggested everyone move to the living room for a little surprise. Her tone was teasing, triumphant, the way one might announce a gender reveal or a renovation. Joan followed slowly, still tasting the salt beneath the sweet. The room was pristine, modern, soft gray velvet couches and a flickering wall-mounted fireplace. A sleek black screen above the mantel blinked to life. Daniel's been begging me to do something with all our family photos, Vanessa beamed. So I curated a digital wall, minimalist, modern, but still sentimental. It's very us. The screen began to cycle through images. Childhood photos of Daniel. Summer birthdays, Christmas mornings, graduation poses, all cleanly filtered in black and white or softened pastels. Joan watched in silence, her stomach tightening. Something was off. The first photo, Daniel in a pumpkin costume, age 4. His father stood smiling next to him. No Joan. Second photo, Daniel blowing candles on a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle cake. No Joan. Third, high school piano recital. Daniel on stage, bowing. Harold again, clapping in the front row. No Joan. Her breath caught. She tried to dismiss it. Surely, she'd appear in the next one. Or the next. But she didn't. Over and over, she recognized the framing, the original photos. They used to hang in her hallway. On her walls. She knew every angle. She had been in all of them. Until now. Someone had cropped her out. The guests murmured polite admiration. Sasha clapped twice. So curated. Love how cohesive it feels, Tyler added. Like a magazine spread. Vanessa laughed airily. I had to clean some of them up, you know, for aesthetic minimalism. Sometimes less really is more. Joan felt her blood simmer. Less. Of me, you mean? The room fell briefly still. Daniel gave a tight smile. Mom, it's just for the wall. We still have the originals somewhere. Vanessa tilted her head, faux guilt in her eyes. It wasn't personal. Just visual balance. Don't be sensitive. Joan nodded once. Excuse me. She walked calmly down the hall, past the candlelit table, past the untouched casserole, past the curated photo of a life she no longer belonged to. She entered the guest bathroom and shut the door softly behind her. It was spotless. She turned the lock. The silence buzzed. Her hands gripped the sink. And then she looked up. The mirror, elegant and frameless, reflected her back at her. But something was wrong. Her face. Softly, shifting. Like heat off asphalt. Her edges wavered, her hair blurred. Her eyes flickered like they couldn't quite stay in one place. She blinked hard. Still, her reflection distorted. Her hands looked like hands behind frosted glass. Her lips fuzzed into her skin. As if the mirror couldn't quite remember her. My mother once told me, they'll erase your name before they erase your worth. Joan sat on the closed toilet lid, palms pressed against her knees. The faucet still dripped behind her. Slow, precise. Like a metronome. Or a countdown. The mirror had cleared, but the image it left behind clung to her like fog. She wasn't losing her mind. She was losing her place. And that was different. She closed her eyes, and her mother's voice returned, clear as frost. They'll take your name out of the sentence before they take your truth out of the story. So speak it, even if your voice shakes. Joan had stayed silent for years. Out of politeness. Out of love. Out of hope that Daniel would someday remember who taught him how to live before Vanessa taught him how to perform. But the mirror tonight had told her the truth. And the truth was not quiet. Then. A basement apartment. Joan, 24, slept sitting up, her body curled around Daniel, who burned with a fever. She'd missed work. Again. The electricity bill was overdue. She had called Harold, but his phone went to voicemail, as usual when things weren't convenient. She placed a cold washcloth on her son's forehead. He mumbled in his sleep. She whispered fairy tales into the dark. Later. A church hallway. Joan stood in heels that pinched and smiled through bruises no one saw. Harold walked a step ahead, shaking hands, making jokes, the perfect grieving husband. Daniel stood between them, lost in a blazer 2 sizes too big. That night, Harold told her she embarrassed him. She cleaned vomit from the carpet. She didn't cry until morning. Now. Joan opened her eyes. None of that pain hung in the air tonight. No one here had known that version of her. But she had. And that was enough. She didn't want revenge. She wanted witness. She stood up slowly, checked her lipstick, straightened the cardigan's hem. Then she walked back into the living room. The projector still played a slow carousel of doctored photos. Daniel was laughing at something Tyler said. Vanessa turned. Oh good. We were just wondering if you'd gotten lost. Joan smiled. I'm exactly where I need to be. She returned to her seat. Not hunched. Not invisible. She rested one hand on her lap and let the other curl gently around her water glass. Sasha was mid-sentence, something about energy work and ancestral patterns. Joan waited. Listened. And when the next silence came, she stepped into it like a stage cue. May I tell a story? They thought I'd tell something soft. Something sweet. They forgot I was there for all of it. Joan folded her hands, the way she used to during library readings when a group of restless kindergartners waited for magic to begin. Only now, the room was filled with adults, and silence held its breath. Vanessa blinked slowly, calculating. Joan began. It was 1994. Daniel had the flu, I had a black eye, and the landlord had sent an eviction notice. But we made a blanket fort in the hallway. Used books as walls, flashlight for a ceiling. He was 5. He told me he wanted to build castles one day. The room didn't move. Daniel opened his mouth, but Joan continued, calm and fluid. He built one. Right here. Glass walls, beautiful floors. Strong foundations. She paused, just enough to let that settle. But here's the thing about castles. If you seal them too tight, the people inside forget what outside air feels like. They mistake confinement for protection. Tyler let out a low huh, unsure if it was admiration or discomfort. Sasha crossed her arms, smile gone. Joan looked at Vanessa. I remember when Daniel played piano with socks on because he thought it made him sound softer. He didn't want to wake the neighbors. He was the kindest child I've ever known. Even when his father forgot that kindness was a thing to protect. Vanessa's spine straightened. Joan, this isn't really. Joan didn't raise her voice. She simply held her ground. I used to keep notebooks. One for every year of Daniel's life. Not facts, feelings. What scared him? What made him laugh? The day he stopped liking peanut butter. The first time he lied. Not to manipulate, but to spare me. Her eyes flicked to Daniel. Do you remember that, sweetheart? You were 7. You told me you had fun at school. But you were crying when you said it. Daniel's mouth parted. Slowly. Quietly. Like he might speak. But he didn't. And Joan smiled gently, like she understood. I'm not telling this for you to remember. I'm telling it so I don't forget. Another beat. Then she turned to the others. You don't need to clap. Sasha looked down. Tyler coughed once, unsure where to place his hands. Vanessa raised her wine glass like a shield. That was intense, she said. Very poetic. Joan's smile didn't flinch. Thank you. It was never meant to be pretty. Questions are weapons, when sharpened right. The espresso machine whirred in the kitchen, steam hissing like a warning. Vanessa busied herself with demitasse cups and saucers, her movements clipped and too loud. Daniel leaned against the counter, avoiding Joan's eyes. Tyler and Sasha scrolled their phones awkwardly, retreating into digital silence. Joan sat back down with quiet elegance, folding her napkin slowly into a triangle. When Vanessa returned with the tray of coffee and sugar cubes, Joan stood to help. Oh no, Joan, sit, Vanessa started. But Joan was already lifting the tray. Please. I used to serve communion. I can handle caffeine. A small laugh followed, polite, unsure. They all took their cups, murmuring thanks. Joan lifted hers but didn't drink. Instead, she looked directly at Vanessa. This place really is stunning. You must have inherited your sense of style. What was your mother like? Vanessa's fingers hesitated on the sugar spoon. Oh, strict, she said, voice flinty. Polished. She believed in rules. Joan smiled, slow and knowing. I can see that. Was she a hostess? Vanessa blinked. Yes. She liked everything just so. Timing, lighting, tone. She didn't tolerate interruption. Dinner was structured. Daniel shifted in his seat, just slightly. Joan nodded sympathetically. Structure is safe. Did she teach you how to cook, or? I taught myself, Vanessa said quickly. She wasn't very involved in that way. Joan said, her tone a blend of softness and steel. Sometimes mothers teach us most by what they don't give. The room went quiet. Sasha sipped. Tyler checked his watch but didn't dare stand. Vanessa straightened her spine. I believe we create our own paths. We're not bound to where we came from. Joan smiled wider. I agree. But still, roots are funny things. Even when we grow past them, they tug. Vanessa's jaw tightened, just enough to betray the effort she was making to appear untouched. Joan turned to Daniel. Do you remember how you used to ask me to leave a night light in the hallway? You said it made the darkness smaller. He looked at her. Not as a boy. Not as a man. As something in between, blinking. I remember, he said, low. Vanessa exhaled sharply. Well, coffee is on, memories are flowing, we should break out something sweet. Joan leaned forward, almost conspiratorial. Actually, would it be all right if I contributed something from my side of the family? Vanessa raised a brow. You brought dessert? Joan's smile was slow and deliberate. In a way. You taste memory before you taste sugar. Joan unwrapped the linen slowly, like a ritual. Inside the tin, golden shortbread cookies lay in uneven rows, crumbling slightly at the edges. No garnish. No drizzle. Just sugar, flour, butter, and thyme. She placed the tin in the center of the table. "These were my mother's," she said. "She made them in 1944. 3 ingredients. No eggs. No vanilla. She'd saved her ration coupons for months. Said sweetness was a kind of resistance." Tyler reached for one. "Wait," Joan said softly. "Let me tell you why they matter." He pulled his hand back, sheepish. The room settled. Joan stood, not dramatically, not with flourish, just firmly. "When the air raids started, my grandmother used to hide flour in the walls. Just in case. My mother was 12 when they walked for 3 days after their town was bombed. They didn't cry. They carried sugar in handkerchiefs. Sucked on it when the hunger made them hallucinate." Sasha leaned forward, eyes wide. "She told me that the body can forget pain. But sweetness? Sweetness plants itself in the mouth of memory and grows." Joan looked down at the tin. "So when she came to America, she brought 2 things, a torn photograph of her mother, and this recipe." Vanessa crossed her arms. "That's dramatic." Joan turned her smile toward her. "Survival often is." She offered the tin to Sasha, then Tyler. They each took one, cautious at first, then reverent, as they chewed. "God," Sasha murmured, "it tastes like something old. But soft." "Comforting," Tyler added. Vanessa, arms still crossed, stayed silent. Joan sat down again, calm as dusk. Daniel looked at the half-eaten cookie in his hand like it was something delicate, unfamiliar. "She taught me how to make them when I was 12, Joan added. Said every family needs a recipe that can last longer than the people who bake it." There was silence. Not awkward. Sacred. Then Vanessa cut in. "Well, that reminds me actually of a story my therapist told me, about how food trauma is inherited. It's all very fascinating. Generational taste memory and such." She smiled brightly, voice climbing back into command. But this time, it didn't land. Daniel, eyes still on the cookie, spoke for the first time in a while. "Mom," he said, slowly. "Did I really write that note?" The room shifted, again. Vanessa froze. Joan blinked. "Which note?" "I hadn't read it in years. I knew it by heart." Joan reached into her handbag, the same worn leather she'd carried to every school recital, every hospital visit, every forgotten parent-teacher conference. From a side pocket, she drew out a yellowed piece of paper, folded neatly into quarters. She held it like something sacred. "I found this yesterday. Wasn't looking for it. It fell out of an old piano book when I opened it." Daniel's eyes followed her hands, hesitant. Joan unfolded it with care, smoothing it flat on the table. It was written in green crayon. "Dear Mom. You're my hero. I'm going to build you a big house one day. With windows that never break. Because you always fix things. I love you more than ice cream and turtles. Daniel, age 7. Joan didn't look at anyone when she read it. Her voice was even, almost gentle. Daniel sat motionless. His breath caught in his chest. His throat moved like he wanted to speak, but couldn't. Vanessa's hand, resting on her knee, curled into a fist. "I wrote that?" Daniel finally said. Joan nodded. "On a Tuesday. After Harold left again. I had burned dinner. You told me I was still magic." He looked down at the note, then up at her. His eyes were glassy now. Unsure. Cracked open. Sasha pressed her hand to her mouth. Tyler looked like he wanted to leave but couldn't. Vanessa exhaled sharply through her nose, laughing once, brittle and strange. Oh, come on. This is emotional blackmail. Joan didn't flinch. It's a memory. It's a setup, Vanessa hissed. You've been waiting to do this. To make me look like some villain. I didn't mention you, Joan replied, softly. But you don't have to. Vanessa's voice was rising now. You sit there, with your war stories and your casseroles and your handwritten notes from 30 years ago, and suddenly I'm the interloper? I'm the one rewriting history? Joan was quiet. Vanessa stood. You always made me feel like I'd never be enough for him. Sometimes, dignity makes more noise than shouting. Joan didn't stand. She didn't gloat. She didn't twist the knife. She simply sat there, one hand resting lightly on her teacup, her cardigan sleeve slightly rolled at the wrist. Her presence filled the room not like thunder, but like gravity, inescapable, quiet, real. Vanessa stood frozen, lips parted. Her words, slick, sharp, curated, had abandoned her. No one moved. Joan finally spoke. I remember being your age. Trying so hard to matter in a room that didn't want to make space. I remember shrinking to fit in. Smiling when I should have screamed. Vanessa's jaw clenched. I know what it is to feel unseen. Or worse, tolerated. I'm not you, Vanessa snapped. I know, Joan replied. That's why I didn't fight back. Vanessa scoffed and turned away, her heels clicking a little too hard on the tile. Excuse me. She disappeared down the hallway, the sound of a door clicking shut behind her, soft, final. Sasha looked like she might say something. Tyler stared into his coffee like it might save him. Joan rose gently and began collecting the plates. You don't have to, Sasha started. I know, Joan said. But it's a habit I've never shaken. The room slowly exhaled. Daniel hadn't moved. Not even blinked, it seemed. He sat like someone trying to remember how to breathe. Joan stacked the dessert plates carefully, folding her linen napkin with fingers that no longer trembled. She wasn't triumphant. She was tired. Not defeated, just done with pretending. She carried the plates into the kitchen, placing them beside the sink. The silence of the house followed her, thick with unsaid things. She reached for a dishcloth, and paused. Behind her, footsteps. Not rushed. Not reluctant. She turned. Daniel stood in the hallway. Eyes red. Shoulders down. Arms at his sides, empty. Mom, he said, barely audible. Can I ask you something? Joan nodded. Mothers remember what sons outgrow. Daniel stared at the floor as if the truth might be easier to say if he didn't have to see her hear it. I stopped calling because she asked me to. Joan said nothing. She said it wasn't healthy, that I kept regressing around you. That your voice put me back into old habits. Joan's breath didn't catch. It slowed. Thickened. Not pain, understanding. A mother's kind of ache. She said you made her feel small. That you judged her. And did I? Joan asked, gently. Daniel shook his head. No. Not really. But I didn't defend you. I let her edit things down. Round off the corners. I told myself it was easier. Cleaner. That you were strong enough to not need me. His voice cracked. But I needed you. He finally looked up. I still do. Joan stepped forward. There was no lecture. No, I told you so. Just arms, familiar, folded, firm. She held him. Not the man. Not the boy. Just her child. For the first time in years. You didn't forget me, she whispered. You forgot who you were around me. that's different. He nodded into her shoulder, wet-cheeked, hands loose at his sides. Daniel's distance wasn't cruelty, it was emotional manipulation. Vanessa had curated his detachment to make room for herself. They stood like that for a long moment, quiet, breathing, slowly repairing. Then, footsteps again. Vanessa reappeared in the hallway, face blank, expression unreadable. In her hands, a single object, old, bent at the corners, edges browned. She held it out toward Joan without speaking. A note card. Handwritten. Smudged. Familiar. Joan took it slowly. Her recipe. The original. The one Daniel had copied from when he was 10. The one that had gone missing years ago. It was crumpled. But intact. Like me. The card was warm from Vanessa's hand. Faded ink. Grease smudges. A thumbprint, maybe Daniel's, maybe hers, preserved like a fossil in the lower corner. Joan ran her fingers along the edge. This wasn't a recipe for food. It was for memory. For survival. For love that doesn't announce itself but stays. Vanessa stood in silence, eyes shining but dry. I meant to give it back, she said. But I didn't know how to without admitting I'd taken it. Joan looked at her. Not with rage. Not with pity. Just long enough to let the silence speak. Vanessa continued. I didn't understand your place in him. It scared me. I thought if I could keep that part quiet, I could be enough. Joan's voice was soft. You don't erase a mother to become a wife. Vanessa nodded, barely. I'm sorry, she said. I know that doesn't fix anything. No, Joan said. But it's a start. She folded the recipe gently and placed it back in her handbag, this time, not buried, but on top. She turned toward the kitchen. Then, behind her. Some conversations only happen over leftovers. The kitchen was quiet, save for the hum of the dishwasher and the soft clink of china being stacked. Joan rinsed the dessert plates one by one, her movements methodical. Vanessa dried them in silence beside her. No performance. No choreography. Just two women surrounded by half-eaten meals and the weight of things unsaid. The casserole dish sat in the sink, still heavy with untouched food. Joan looked at it. He used to sneak spoonfuls of this at midnight, she murmured. Said it tasted better cold. Vanessa offered a soft smile. He still does that. With gelato now. It wasn't a peace offering. But it wasn't a dismissal either. They worked side by side. The kind of domestic stillness that only happens after storms. Then, without prompting, Vanessa spoke. My mother used to throw dinner plates when she got angry. She'd cry afterward, say it wasn't about me. But it always felt like it was. Joan didn't interrupt. I spent years thinking if I could control the table, the timing, the taste, the lighting, I could control everything. The way it felt to be looked at. Joan handed her a glass. And did it work? Vanessa shook her head. Only made the silence sharper. She set the glass down, towel shaking just slightly in her hands. I'm not proud of how I've acted, she said. But I didn't know how to be in the same room as his history without feeling like a footnote. Joan wiped the counter slowly. You don't have to be a footnote, she said. But you can't erase the chapters that came before you. Vanessa nodded. Eyes lowered. It was the closest she'd come to breaking. Joan didn't offer forgiveness. She offered something quieter. A shared moment of being human. The floor between them wasn't clean. But it was no longer hostile. They finished the dishes in silence. Then Vanessa, still holding the last towel, turned slightly. Will you come again? She asked. Not with eagerness. not with demand. Just hope. The dining table was still warm. But the air was cold now. The chairs were still askew, napkins half folded, the wine glasses ringed with fingerprints. But Sasha and Tyler were gone, coats retrieved, excuses mumbled, doors quietly closed. The party had ended without a goodbye. Joan stood in the middle of the living room, looking at the aftermath. Not messy, but hollow, like a theater after curtain call. Daniel reappeared with 2 mismatched mugs of tea. One chipped. One stained. He handed her the chipped one. "You always liked this one better." Joan took it, fingers wrapping around the warmth. They sat on the couch, not touching, but closer than they'd been in years. "I don't know how to say I'm sorry for all of it," Daniel said, staring into the steam. "But I know I need to." Joan took a sip. "You don't need to say everything at once. Just don't stop saying it." They sat in the quiet. No grand speeches. No closing statements. Just the slow weaving of something frayed. Outside, wind brushed against the windows. Inside, the clock ticked like breath. When Joan stood to leave, Daniel followed instinctively, like he used to when he was 8, walking her to the door with his stuffed bear tucked under one arm. She picked up her handbag. He reached to take her coat. "Do you still keep those notebooks?" he asked. "I do. Could I read one someday?" Joan smiled gently. "Maybe." They reached the door. He opened it for her. The porch light hummed above them. The neighborhood was quiet, sterile, suburban, a far cry from the patchy lawns and warm chaos of their old block. Joan stepped outside, coat wrapped tight. Daniel hesitated in the doorway. "You really think we're okay?" She turned. "No. But we're no longer pretending we are." And that, for tonight, was enough. As she stepped off the porch, a sound floated from the yard next door. Laughter. Light. Hi. A child's. Joan paused. The window glowed softly. She smiled, not because it reminded her of anything, but because it didn't. A small boy in the window was helping his mother stir batter. Joan paused at the edge of the walkway, breath catching, not from emotion, but memory. The house next door glowed golden from the kitchen window. Inside, a woman leaned over a mixing bowl, her sleeves rolled up, smile soft. Beside her stood a small boy on a step stool, wooden spoon gripped in both hands, stirring like it mattered. The moment lasted only a few seconds. But it rooted itself inside Joan like light in a dark room. No fuss. No audience. Just a mother and her child, doing something ordinary. And in that ordinariness, something sacred. Joan's fingers drifted to the strap of her handbag. The recipe card was still inside. Creased. Slightly smudged with butter from earlier. Safe. She thought about all the meals that would never be made again. All the moments she hadn't captured. All the things she'd carried that no one would ever see. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel bitter. She felt done. Not erased. Not defeated. Just released. She pulled her coat tighter, warmth gathering in her chest like slow sunlight. A smile tugged at her lips, not the measured one, not the polite one, but the real one. Soft and just for her. She turned toward the sidewalk, steps slow, steady. Each one lighter. Not because anything had been fixed, but because she'd stopped holding it all alone. She passed under the street lamp. Wind moved gently through the trees. The porch behind her creaked. She didn't look back. Until a voice, Daniel's, low, urgent. "Joan, wait." He handed me a container. She made it again, "Your way." Joan turned to find Daniel on the porch, one hand holding a small glass dish wrapped in foil, still warm from the oven. He walked toward her, careful, like approaching something delicate. She asked me if it was right, he said. I told her close wasn't enough. Joan raised an eyebrow. And? She remade it. From your card. He handed her the dish. Joan took it, the warmth seeping through her coat, anchoring her. I stayed up, he said. Watched her slice the onions. Real cheddar. No foam. No plating. Joan looked down at the foil. You remembered the casserole tasted better cold. Daniel smiled. So we made enough for leftovers. He didn't say anything more. He didn't have to. Vanessa stood behind the screen door, watching. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. But her presence wasn't guarded anymore. Just open. Joan gave a small nod. Vanessa returned it, a quiet truce stitched from humility. Joan turned back to Daniel. Don't wait so long next time. I won't, he said. And next time, bring the notebooks? She smiled. Maybe. He kissed her cheek, quick and warm. Then he stepped back onto the porch. Joan tucked the casserole close, cradling it like something sacred. She didn't rush the walk home. She let the night hold her gently, cool wind brushing against her face, stars dusted over the sky like a blessing that didn't need her permission. She passed the house with the little boy in the window. The kitchen was dark now, but the image still lived behind her eyes. At home, she unlocked the door, stepped inside, and flicked on the light. The stillness of her space welcomed her, not empty, just peaceful. She moved to the kitchen, opened the fridge. Inside, next to a jar of blackberry jam and a half carton of milk, was a small framed note. The edges worn. Crayon faded. You're my hero, Mom. Joan smiled. She placed the casserole dish beside it, side by side, where it belonged. No ceremony. No applause. Just memory. Preserved. Shared. Whole. The fridge hums. The note glows softly under the kitchen light. Joan steps back. And finally, closes the door.